Welcome back to Soar Financially, everybody. Thank you so much yet again for joining us here on this channel. We're going to talk a lot more mining and mining trends today. It's going to be a part 2 of our discussion we had with Joe Mazumdar at the end of May. A lot of you watched it. I got a lot of great feedback on the discussion because it really frames the trends, what is happening in the market. And we just discussed 30 minutes off air what we're going to talk about. We should have just recorded that, left it that, hit send pretty much on it because it was fantastic. I wrote down a lot of topics we're going to go through here because there are a lot of underlying trends that might not be visible or as obvious. Like, we all know about it, but it's good to talk them through, to be honest. And really excited to have Joe back here. Let me bring him on screen. He's the editor, publisher, analyst. What do you call him yourself? Bottle dishwasher? What's the phrase? Like,
I don't know. That's
like chief bottle washer. What's the guy who does everything, right? At Exploration Insights.
Yes, I mean, my wife does edit. Sometimes she makes everything that I write legible. But yeah, it's basically, I mean, we keep it short and limit the G&A.
Fantastic. No, I'm excited to have you back on. I tremendously enjoyed just the last half hour, just us chatting, because there are so many trends that are somewhat, I wouldn't say unnoticed, but they're not...
That nobody cares about sometimes.
I think people care, but they don't put it in context and trying to understand and make sense of it, because we talked about this. Like, I've got so many topics we're going to talk to. Lithium, Newcrest, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Chile and Peru. There's so many things going on that we should pay attention to, where we could actually make money off potentially as well. So let's dive into that. We last spoke at the end of May. Let's summarize the last 3-4 months here real quick as well. Has the sentiment changed at all? Has anything changed in the market that we should be aware of, Joe?
Well, I would say for precious metals, the sentiment hasn't changed much, and unless you're like a unicorn and can deliver, the intersections that retail wants, it's hard to get any momentum. And the financings that we see right now for a lot of companies are, like, unfortunately, the longer term warrants, and those warrants tend to be at a strike price lower than most people's initial positions, and that's where we're at right now. And they're not raising enough either, so they're almost raising incrementally and waiting for that next intersection to raise on the back of, and it's harder right now. And a lot, as you've seen with news, especially with precious metals, tends to be a liquidity event and not a positive. So that's still on that side, but I think that's much different for certain critical minerals where there's much more momentum, and the momentum might not be from Canada. What you were saying about the ASX and what we were talking about, a lot of it is being driven by dual listed companies or ASX listed companies coming into, whether it's Brazil or Canada or something like that, but the funding is coming definitely from Australia.
Yeah, lots of interesting trends. I think we need to pick up on the critical minerals part, but also Australia. Let's start there, Australia. Like, I was talking, we were chatting beforehand, so I hope I get all the right questions in, because it was a brilliant discussion. But is there more activity, more action in Australia right now? Because you said, like, we had the Patriot Battery Metals, we had American West Metals with their Storm discovery now, and that's just copper. The other one is more of a lithium product. Winsome. I wrote down some names that we discussed before earlier, but it seems like there's way more action down there in volume.
Yeah, a lot of ASX before was West Africa. A lot of ASX listed companies, mostly from Perth, going to West Africa, finding things. And, Perth, I think, has a conference that's called Africa Down Under, because they raise a lot of money specifically for West Africa. But what we're seeing now is not so much West Africa, given potentially all the coups that we've seen coming through that part of that continent. Is we're seeing a lot of push for critical minerals in different jurisdictions, whether it's lithium in northern Quebec. A lot of the enthusiasm that I saw in Quebec, where it was in June, I think it was, at this conference, was actually companies that were either dual listed or just listed in the ASX. Most of the funding was coming from Australia to explore and develop projects in Quebec. And so the money wasn't coming only from flow through for Canadians, it was coming for ASX ones direct. And we have to understand how ASX works. ASX does not have flow through. So there's nobody investing in a company does not have an incentive to understand the asset, understand the management, the jurisdiction, and everything that'll make that share price go up. It's not just a tax incentive. That does not happen in Australia, and ASX-listed companies do not have a 4-month hold. once that financing is done, you could sell. So for that, those are the sort of companies that are finding things in Quebec. But then the Canadian retail has sort of caught on to the back of that. And so you could see more retail looking at these things now, but it's basically the ASX led. And now what we see in Quebec is not only is it, ASX, but now we're seeing companies like Ford, we're seeing Volkswagen, we're seeing Korean battery manufacturers involved, we're seeing M&A, Livent, Alchem, we're seeing a big, strategic investment by Albemarle. So you're seeing a lot of players in Quebec right now for spodumene lithium dikes that we didn't see when we had the Nemaska debacle several years ago. We had lithium at a much lower price. We didn't have all these other players, and we don't have that enthusiasm to build the infrastructure right now that we do, especially the downstream infrastructure for the battery manufacturers to go straight into the car manufacturing for Ford and for Volkswagen in the States.
What is different to Nemaska now? Because that was 2016, 2017. There was a hype in the market. Nemaska had crazy valuations, but they blew through a ton of money, burned a lot of investors. What is the difference now?
I would say, if you look at Nemaska, it was one of those lithium cycles, and we might be in one in terms of a bubble. I mean, what we're seeing is that there's just not enough lithium to make these batteries right now, and there's not enough lithium coming from brines. And so spodumene is an easy thing to mine. It's not very metallurgically difficult to extract. The big problem is infrastructure, getting it from that spodumene concentrate. And we got to understand the spodumene concentrate, just stoichiometrically, you get about 1 to 1.5% in most of your lithium oxide in these dikes. And then you're converting it to about a 5.5% concentrate. Then you have to take it and make a lithium hydroxide out of it. And that's what ends up being used in the cathode. So all the big problem or the big investment, the big technology is really the downstream part. It's not the mining part. No. It's the downstream part.
Well, that's where Nemaska failed.
Yeah, and also the infrastructure from taking that concentrate where you're not really concentrating it that much. Like, if you looked at a copper concentrate, you're taking like an open pit grade of 0.5%, but making it a 25%. A copper concentrate grade. But here you're only taking something that's 1.5% and tripling it maybe. It's not the same. So the volume of rock, you haven't shrunk that much, and so infrastructure is much more important. And Quebec has power, but now they have to get the rail going. But it's not just one project. There's multiple projects, and they're trying to look at a hub processing facility between Montreal and Quebec City called Bécancour. And so there's and the other big difference is the players, the amount of players involved, and the deep pockets they have. And their interest in building this infrastructure.
A lot more legs to stand on.
That's probably the best way to put it. And they're very keen. Very keen.
Interesting. Who would run the central processing facility? Would that be?
Well, I
don't want to say state-run or government-run, right? It doesn't make sense.
Ford is doing one with EcoPro, and I believe Volkswagen is doing it with another Korean battery cathode manufacturer. So they're bringing their technology, and then Ford and Volkswagen are building their distribution, and the fact that they're the ones that are building, that's where the EV battery goes into their cars.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting trends there. Like we talked again beforehand, so I need to phrase the questions. A lot of things going in my
because if we were just looking
right?
from a supply-demand basis, we could say, well, Jesus, there's a lot of lithium dikes out there. There are. The thing is that if brine production doesn't pick up, and brine production is kind of limited in the end, the way they do it now, we could have a big explosion of direct lithium extraction works on oil brines. And some other places, then you wouldn't do spodumene. It wouldn't make any sense. But right now, people have to get going. They can't wait for that technology. But when that technology comes, that will be another major breakthrough. But right now, we're into making lithium out of the rawest form, like going to hard rock.
So do you see production picking up anytime soon? Then it seems like there's a bit of hesitancy. Waiting what the marketplace will do in terms of the
lithium carbon
right?
equivalent prices are down 60%, mostly because of China, because of their EV manufacturing and their sales and things like that. But what's happening now is people are trying to build up that infrastructure for 3 to 5 years from now, to get that EV penetration domestically while taking into account the global changes in supply infrastructure. So now you can't get, that EV battery from here or wherever. I have to look for where it's going to come from. I need the cobalt myself. I need the lithium myself. And finally, the U.S., decided to make copper a critical mineral, because now they know that they don't have enough of that either. But so all of that is driving not only doing lithium in Quebec, but the thing is, like, where else are you going to get it from?
There are not many other places in the world.
Yeah,
not on spodumene side, but brines, you go down to Chile.
But a lot of that's now you see the BYD, as we were talking offline, one of the biggest EV car manufacturers in China, which would make it one of the biggest in the world. They're doing infrastructure downstream in Chile and in Brazil. Why? So they can get direct access to the lithium in the Salar de Atacama, and also so they can get access to lithium from projects like Sigma in Brazil. They can get iron ore from Brazil, and they can get the phosphate, so they can build these LFP batteries, which are a different sort of battery. So I think those countries want the downstream, they want the value add, but and now China is more willing to give it to them because they have fewer options.
Interesting. I want to put I wouldn't say a bow around, but sort of a summary question for the lithium part, especially since we talk mostly Quebec. And is there still opportunity for investors?
Well, I'm not going out buying lithium. I'm just trying to understand what the market is. But I do have a company, with these prospect generators that, pick up a lot of ground. And, one ground that's good for nickel ends up being good for gold as well. And then suddenly it's good for spodumene dikes that they weren't looking at before. And, they've got a big joint venture now with Rio Tinto and with a Quebec local. So there's a lot of impetus. And now, and interesting, that same company is going to Australia to drum up more interest in their situation, because they think that they could probably raise money from funds there easier than doing it from, funds from outside of Quebec.
Interesting. That's coming back to Australia, right? So that Canadian companies see more opportunity down there as well, meaning on the financial market side.
If it's on the critical mineral side, I doubt if a gold company here would find any
love down there.
Down there. But if you're like a rare earth and doing something like these ionic clay deposits, then suddenly you would find interest in Australia. Yeah. A lot of the excitement in that Rick Rule conference that I went to in Boca Raton, I think that was in June.
July 24th.
Okay. Yeah, you got it.
It was my kid's birthday around that week. That's why I know.
Okay, right. Yeah, okay. Not my kid's birthday. So and it was around an ionic clay play in Brazil. But the ionic clay plays are mostly in China. So it's not known for people to look for ionic clay outside of China. But now the interest is there, because now, with all this segmented supply chain, you might not get rare earth elements or the magnets anymore from China. Interesting. So now you'll have to manufacture them themselves, and now where do you get the rare earths? And so that's another thing that's picking up, and that's an ASX listed company as well.
Interesting. Like a lot of points to follow up on now, because you brought up the geopolitics and you brought Brazil up, because you've traveled there recently to Brasilia as well, because I think that's a highly interesting jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like I was there more than a year ago to look at a copper play, a producer there that had growth. But what fascinated me was, when I used to work down in South America, I had this, and when I worked for a big copper company, my impression was Brazil was great if you were Brazilian. For a foreigner to come in, you'll never make any money. But now, Vale can't do everything, and so Brazil has had other companies come in and be successul, and they're listed on the TSX, they're listed on the ASX. And when I went down there, I went down there for a conference called ADIMBA, A-D-I-M-B. Don't ask me the Portuguese translation of the acronym. But if you look at it, the mining minister came to that meeting and he spoke, and he actually wanted me to send him my presentation on WhatsApp. But he actually came to the, so it wasn't like an associate of his who only showed up for 10 seconds and left. He was there for a significant amount of time, and he was also at the dinner the night before. And there was a lot of collegiality between the industry and the government, all promoting the same thing. Hey, we want it Brazil, let's go Brazil, sort of thing.
Now that Ike Batista's gone, right? Like he used to own, didn't he own like 90% of the mineral claims or something? Something outrageous.
I mean, Vale is a big company down there, and you know, I think we were going to get into, you know, other forms of investment and jurisdictions coming in to invest. And you know, now the Saudis are coming in investing in Vale with their private investment fund. So they're picking up money from there. And Brazil's one of these places, like a lot of countries right now in Africa and South America, they're not leaning one way or the other. They're not leaning to the Western supply chain or the Chinese supply chain. If you're smart, you're playing both of them against each other. So what else can you offer? Well, okay, we'll build a downstream battery plant for you. Okay, what else? Okay, we'll do this, that sort of thing. And I think that's where companies are getting to, you know, that they want to. And processing facilities is where a lot of the money from government agencies is coming from.
Interesting. Like, it leads me to, I had a lot of discussions on the BRICS and East versus West kind of on the macro scale. What you're saying is more on the micro scale. It's interesting. Like the BRICS even playing against each other. Like, you know, Brazil is the B in BRICS, obviously, but there's China and India, and you say, well, if you want something from us, you got to put in something.
Exactly.
Right? This is not a guarantee.
They're not going to
because we're part of the BRICS. We're not going to give it to you for free.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, India would have no problems being part of the G20 and the BRICS at the same time.
Yeah.
They're not playing favorites.
Exactly.
Nobody should. Yeah. You know, but obviously the Chinese are a focal point of one group. They're the C in the BRICS, but it's a big capital C, and maybe India is a capital, but everybody else is lowercase.
Small s in there, and
very small s. And then with the West, it's Europe and the U.S. But Europe is definitely trying to make sure that they still talk to the Chinese, because they can't. I mean, nobody can. It's hard for them to domestically replicate what the Chinese have done in 20 years in like 5. It's going to be impossible. So that's why they're trying to super fund, let's say, lack of a better word, processing, accelerate that as much as they can. But they know it's hard for them to permit processing facilities in the States, you know. So they might have to push it back to that country that actually.
And we were happy to outsource it 10, 15 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. That's why we had no inflation.
Yeah.
That's why, you know, everything was, low interest rates, everything like that. But now inflation has come back to roost because now you're going to have higher labor costs. That's part of the reason why Mexico is doing better now, and almost thinking that they can get away by screwing the mining industry because manufacturing is coming back to Mexico. So all these other companies are looking, well, look at the labor rates in the U.S. If I hire the same people here, I could get 3 of them in Mexico for half the price. So I'll do what I used to do 25 years ago. I'll send it all back to Mexico. So Mexico's doing pretty well.
MAGA. No, MAGA's make Mexico great again, right? It seems like that's
Mexico great again. Mama?
Mexico, Mama? Yeah, something like that. It was like a poor attempt at humor. But let's say on the geopolitical issues a little bit, and permitting is one thing as well. You said you're excited about going down to Chile and Peru later this year as well, because you're seeing opportunities there. Because you see it changing a little bit on the geopolitical side.
Well, the thing is that I think what Chile realizes is for them to be involved in this critical mineral economy that's growing up, they're going to have to start producing copper. And Codelco's production rates are falling precipitously, and now they want to own half the lithium production from the country, and that's going to also have a hit on their foreign direct investment if they nationalize lithium, which is what they're looking to do. And so how do you attract other people to come in and invest what you have to do is make permitting easier. You have to make, those projects that make sense and you're okay with, accelerate those projects. I'm seeing that now in Peru. The mining minister in Peru has met with a bunch of companies and he's trying to make it easier to accelerate project permitting. Their problem will still be infrastructure. Maybe there's only one road that goes to the port, and some guy with 10 tires can start burning those, and then there goes your infrastructure. And so both those countries need a bit of work, but the endowment, the prospectivity hasn't changed. And also the U.S. is very interested in both those countries because they're 2 countries that they have free trade agreements with.
I used to be a big fan of Peru a few years ago. I was down there for like 2-3 site visits within 12 months and loved it. But then it sort of fell to the wayside.
Yeah, and understandably, in terms of what's been happening and, the infrastructure issues and also, how long it takes to get a permit to drill down there. But if it's changing and if we're hitting the bottom, the prospectivity and the endowment hasn't changed in either country. So for me, South America is looking better. Peru, Chile, Brazil definitely has been on the up for a while. Argentina still has infrastructure issues.
Pretty much talking just base metals and critical metals, right?
Yes.
Like when we talk about that, I meant to follow up with a question there when you said, well, Peru is trying to loosen or talking.
Yeah, most of that's...
Right? But it's mostly on the base metals.
Right, those are the big
critical,
projects. Those
right?
are the big projects, the big copper projects and that, you want to see those things go forward.
It's not the smallish gold projects or even gold in general, right?
No,
it's not getting the love.
No, it's not those. It's basically what's getting the love right now is copper down there and lithium.
Interesting. Interesting. Jumping around a little bit, but rare earth elements is one topic we wanted to discuss because it's an interesting one because there's rare earth elements everywhere.
Yeah,
right. Like I can go to Home Depot, buy a bag of sand, and there's rare earth elements in there.
Yeah,
right?
If it's monazite.
Yeah, probably, but you can pick it up at the Home Depot.
But the problem with here's the thing is that monazite, the mineral from those sands that you're talking about, heavy mineral sands, has uranium, thorium in it. And so for someone to process that, they need a permit for uranium or thorium in their tailings.
You won't get it in West Vancouver.
Yeah, you won't get it. You won't get it. Yeah, so that's part of the issue.
That's exactly, but because you brought up the ionic clays as well. So where's the interest coming from again? And what again? Same question as with lithium. What's different this time? Because a lot of people have been burned on the rare earth side back in even 2009, 2010.
Yeah, but what we know about rare earths is not that that there's not enough of it, but most of the processing capacity and production is coming from China. And so that makes most of the West very, scared. Yeah. And so if you look at, and this was good, the USGS did, they did a mid-term critical mineral, chart, and they did a near-term medical chart.
I remember that one, yeah.
And they were, you could see the differences in the charts as they went from near to medium, but also you could look at the chart versus what they thought of before and how things have accelerated in terms of becoming even more hypercritical. And rare earths is one of those. Niobium, neodymium, and praseodymium, the NdPr, and the dysprosium, I think it is, and there's a couple others. And they use them for the magnets for the EV cars.
Or in the wind turbines.
Yeah,
right? So,
but most of it is for the magnets and the EVs. But you're right; they come for a few different things. But the problem is the source. Yeah. And so ionic clay is big in China. It's also big in Vietnam. So these things are becoming more of the thing to try and do. They're different from other deposits. It's almost like, because you're leaching them with, I believe it's ammonium sulfate. And interestingly is that you want to keep the pH level, and this is important to anybody looking at ionic clay, you want to keep the pH level when in the assays to about 4%. Oh, sorry, not 4%, a pH of 4. Yeah. Because you don't want it too acidic. Because if you get it too acidic, you'll get a better, grade of your neodymium, praseodymium, and all that. But you can't actually process that because too low of a pH brings out a lot of other deleterious elements in the rare earth that you can't use, and it becomes like an unserviceable product. So you have to keep the pH level at a point where you get the rare earths, but you don't get all the, let's say, crap. Yeah.
It's interesting because before Soar Financial and everything here, I used to work for a small corporate finance boutique, and one of our clients was a rare earth company. And the story you just mentioned is exactly what we had in our pitch deck 2009. Yeah. China, over 90% of the market, same things, same companies around, Lynas and Mountain Pass, right? Mountain Pass is now MP Materials, I think.
Yeah.
Are they still producing? I haven't followed them in that SPAC.
But now look at the market cap of Mountain Pass and look at the money they're getting from the U.S. government. But Mountain Pass originally still had to send their rare earth oxide to China to get treated. to get processed. But now they need to build that processing facility here. That's where the government will help them fund. Linus as well. And again, that's ASX listed, building a refinery in Texas for rare earths. They're getting funded by the U.S. government. So we've got different players. So you're not waiting for the retail market.
No.
You're not waiting for a bank.
It's government driven now. It's absolutely. That's the difference.
That's and then also potentially a little bit of private equity, but the big checks for that processing facilities are being written by the government. And now we're seeing that being played out to the nth degree in Saudi Arabia, because they want to build this new future where they're not dependent on oil, and they will be the battery manufacturers of the world.
Glad you brought that up. It was my next cue, is just sort of, where's the money coming from, right? And they're sitting on a ton. Right, they need to deploy capital. I forgot what the exact number was, but it's in the billions.
Yeah, everything there is in the billions.
That's true, actually, inflation, right? But let's talk about that, because a lot of interest actually in the area itself. Royal Road, I remember, is an explorer that went into Saudi Arabia. Barrick, I think, is quite active.
Barrick has a mine there with a joint venture, I think, with Ma'aden. I think it's Jalal Saeed or something like that. And now
Friedland is doing something there as well.
Yeah, he's using his geophysics with Ma'aden. And to help them look at their prospects, so he's applying his proprietary geophysical technique on it. So there's a lot. And Friedland's a very smart guy, but he understands where the money is. So when he goes in the DRC, one of the most prospective, well-endowed countries in the world, but geopolitically not something that most Western investors will put money into, he goes to the Chinese. And so over the last 20 years now, he's got one of the best mines in the world with Kamoa-Kakula. And so the next step is now, because people are, going all negative on Chinese investment, now he's going to the next step in terms of where the money is, Saudi Arabia. And that's the same thing with Barrick. Yeah. Mark Bristow is finding money there. He'll find money to invest in projects that people in the West won't want to invest in those countries, like your Pakistan and place like that.
Reko Diq,
He will find that in the Middle East because they have less of a problem with those places.
That's where Friedland went years ago. I remember him 2-3 years ago, where he was openly, at that mining conference. I think it was the IMARC guys who host the conference in Saudi Arabia early January every year.
Yeah.
And he was openly courting the Saudis as one of the first ones I remember. He was always good at that. Either Chinese for the Congo or Saudi Arabia now for the latest developments, right?
Yeah, and you need to go, because those are guys that are able to write big checks really quick, just like the Chinese. They don't need a lot of humming and hawing and stuff like that. They'll do it, and that's basically what you need for mineral exploration, but also for development. You can't be waiting for retail. You can't be waiting for institutional equity, which really doesn't exist, or private equity to screw you. You're saying, okay, I'm going to make copper, but hey, when you make that copper, send it over here. He goes, okay, sure, no problem. And that's why you have all this like Trafigura. Trafigura is sort of these traders are being left on the wayside, because you got all these other people demanding the offtake, and they want to be the intermediaries, but they don't want the intermediaries anymore. So what they've done is they're looking to build this huge railway from the DRC, from the Zambian copper belt to Angola, to a port facility there, and that will tap the Zambian potentially as well. They'll put railways into there as well eventually, and into the DRC, and take the copper out without being obliged to send it to the Chinese. And another entity that's involved in that is the U.S. government. Because when I was in Indaba, a couple of months before I was in Indaba, which was February, the latter part of last year, the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in the DRC and Zambia talking to him about copper and cobalt.
There was 6 months ago, something like that.
Yeah, November,
right?
That
yeah, I remember that actually.
Yeah,
it's interesting, like how the geopolitics.
They're trying to get ahead of the game now,
down, right?
They're trying to get ahead, but they're trying to make up for 20 years of neglect.
No. Interesting. We should write a book about that. It reads like a Jean Le Carré thriller.
Yeah, no,
a little bit, right?
It's interesting the way this is playing out, and it'll be interesting to see, because even when I went to that Indaba, these guys were talking about building out battery infrastructure, but I thought, Jesus, you guys don't even have roads, you don't have rail, you don't have port facilities, and you're talking about making this a hub for battery manufacturers. Everybody's talking about that.
Fantastic. Since the last topic was flow of funds, and I have one last topic I want to cross off the list here, is the Newcrest, or the Newmont-Newcrest merger and acquisition, right? And the fallout from it. I think we briefly touched on it last conversation here at the end of May as well. Do we have any more clarity on that? Do you see more happening now?
I mean, it's going to happen, obviously, but it'll probably take 2 years to digest. And then what we'll see is like what happens to these projects that they divest of, because now you'll have more efficient use of capital. So the second tier projects for Newmont or the second tier projects of Newcrest won't get built. All their first tier projects will get built, and that's where the funding will get. And the projects you don't like, you'll be defunding. And so those things, will they form divestments? You know, is there a market for those projects?
Is coffee going to hit the market then?
I don't know. I don't know, because it was in the market, then they took it off the market. But I mean, there's a whole bunch of these projects, and so is there a new way to look at these projects? Like a lot of the low-grade copper and gold stuff that they picked up in Chile from Goldcorp. I mean, does that, with having better block caving expertise, does that make sense now? Does that go higher up in the priority list? Before we didn't want, we meaning Newmont didn't want to do it, but now maybe we do. So bringing that expertise, bringing a different way of looking at exploration, which I think in terms of exploration, I think probably Newcrest has the high upper hand. And that would be interesting to see who wins on that one, on that arm wrestle, because Newcrest has been quite active with private placements.
They've been super active in BC, Golden Triangle. They're
in Nevada.
In a few companies,
yeah. So we're seeing them being very active. So does that continue under Newmont?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Let's see how that plays out. But let's flip the question around, because I talked flow of funds, and one thing I had in mind asking the question was, big institutions usually own like portfolio positions like 5%, let's say, of Newmont, then they own 5% in their portfolio of Newcrest, right? Combined, it's 10%, which is way too much. They're overweight. They'll need to trim. But where's that money going to flow? That's sort of
where's the money from the institutional equity
exactly
flow?
So the 5% that sort of need reallocating in each portfolio.
Yeah, a lot of these guys are building new funds for critical minerals, and so you might see some of that allocated into something else, unless those guys are really interested and keen on keeping it in precious. Because what we're seeing, I mean, even if we talk about Beaver Creek, that's the Precious Metals Summit, how many companies there are not precious metals?
Actually, I haven't looked at because the list has gotten too long.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not all taken up by precious metals companies.
No, that's changed. Even our conference, DEUTSCHE GOLDMESSE, like the GOLDMESSE is a clickbait title. I have to admit, we're holistic. We look at good projects.
Well,
and if they're in the lithium space, copper space.
You're trying to connect A and B. A is interested in B. You're not going to bring them C if they want to see B.
Yeah.
So you're going to bring them what they want, but give the people what they want. So it doesn't matter what the title of your conference is, or that's why we keep the letter generic in terms of Exploration Insights. We're not commodity driven.
I was going to ask you, like, it should have been the opening question to our conversation. Is it because I picked up a theme that you're showing gold the cold shoulder a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're still overexposed to gold, and not to production, but mostly to exploration. And I still feel most of those are undervalued, so I haven't been selling, and it's a pretty illiquid environment. But everything that's new has been more copper. That's basically, whether it's exploration or production, is all been copper.
Are there any copper royalty companies out there?
There have been some trying to do royalties on copper. It's harder to do on copper because
such a bulk commodity. It's like, how are you going to?
Yeah, copper is hardly ever a byproduct.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard because as soon as they do it on a copper project, the copper project's weak because they required a stream.
They just pre-sold their main product. Like, you should never do that, even as a gold project.
You should never do that. Yeah.
So fantastic.
Yeah.
Joe, awesome conversation as always. Great part 2 of what we've done in late May. Thank you so much. You've been traveling a lot. You will be doing a lot of travel. So where can we find more of you?
Well, I just want to note that I did change my sweater, and I'm not wearing the same sweater, and so this is a different conversation. But yes, explorationinsights.com. We've got a lot of free stuff out there. I did a critical mineral piece for Brazil and a lithium geology one.
I saw that one for the Rick Rule conference.
Yeah.
That was quite insightful.
Yeah, and so we'll be doing those are on the website for free. And if you're interested in what we do, obviously take a stab at subscribing.
Fantastic. Joe, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming in. Really, really appreciate that. I keep flipping the cameras here today. It's like, I haven't been in the studio for 3.5 months, so I was just like, it's all crazy. But let's go here and thank everybody for tuning in. This is still not the right camera. Where is the right camera? Not the right camera. I made that mistake before. Oh, there we were. Now everybody's lost it, gone anyway. But I want to thank everybody who's still here after this debacle. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really enjoyed the conversation here with Joe Mazumdar of Exploration Insights, as always. This is a must-watch episode usually as well. It gives you a fantastic overview of what's happening, what are the underlying trends. I think we need to do more of a polit thriller in mining conversations. What is happening? Like, why is Blinken in Africa? Things like that. I think we need to discuss more. Yeah. Really appreciate you tuning in. Hit that subscribe button.
Put one of those luggage tags on him and chase him.
Yeah, exactly. Like Jean-Luc Carré. Like, really chase up what is going on here. Like, it's just spy thriller because there's so many undercurrents from the political side.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, really fascinating. That's what fascinates me as well. That's why I love the geopolitical talks with some of the guests on the channel as well, like Simon Hunt or Alison McLeod, for example. Really insightful. Really.
Well, just for Simon Hunt is somebody when I worked for Phelps Dodge we used to talk to on a quarterly basis because he was the most in tune with China at that point when China was growing.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Like that conversation, probably the most watched on our channel actually.
Yeah.
Like deservedly so, I think.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Everybody else, thank you so much. We'll be back with more.